Shawn, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Today's podcast, we're really going to be looking and hearing about Shawn and Justin's story and how there is hope for families who struggle with a family member with PTSD. And I think maybe just the starting point is to hear more about your guys' family experience with PTSD, if you're open to sharing.
Sure. When my husband returned home, it was 2004. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of help for PTSD. I mean, they sent him home with some books that I read and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, this doesn't really apply. It wasn't what was happening in our house. So PTSD never crossed my mind. I describe the period in time from 2004 to 2009 when my husband finally did get into help at the VA. I mean, it was hell on earth. And our home had turned basically into a war zone. The war came right into my front door without any warning. And so whenever we did get into the VA in 2009, I was quite shocked when they said PTSD. And I remember sitting there going, no, it can't be. I read those books and they're going, yeah, it really is. And there were things were happening. I've known my husband since he was 6 years old. And
really?
So, yeah, really.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, the funny part is how we met is I was his babysitter.
Oh my God.
And, yeah. And whenever you look at it, whenever we're kids, we're only 4.5 years apart, but from 6 to 10, back in the 80s, it wasn't uncommon for a 10 and 11-year-old, to babysit for a few hours.
Right.
Well, by the time I got to high school, he was finished in elementary school and middle school. We had lost contact with each other because, in high school, it's not cool to hang around young kids like that. Well, whenever, I guess it was about 3 or 4 years after I graduated high school, he entered the military. Well, in 2001, Christmas break, he came back home. And that's where we reconnected. I was working at TGI Fridays. I was the head trainer there. I was training the waitresses there. And he came in during Christmas, and we were inseparable from that point on.
Wow.
And yeah, so when he returned home in 2004, some of the things that were happening, I mean, his anger level was just explosive. The way I described it, it was like dropping a nuclear bomb in our house between the two of us. I mean, it just annihilated everything. And so seeing that and knowing who my husband was his entire life, I knew that something was wrong. Something had changed. I just didn't know what. And that kind of put me, I think, at a little more advantage than some of the other couples who haven't known their spouse their entire life. Because for me, it was really easy to tell. He went to the military. He was fine. All of a sudden, it was like a switch. And so it was easier for me to pinpoint something happened. I didn't know what, but something happened that had changed.
Wow. And so was there a specific thing that you were able to identify as contributing to the PTSD, or was it just a compilation of many, many different events while he was deployed?
It was many, many events. In February 2003, there was a fishing boat while they were doing training exercises. A fishing boat had caught fire, and they had rescued 4 out of the 5. The 5th that they rescued was deceased. Then there was the plane crash, which Discovery Channel happened to be on the ship recording whenever this plane crash happened. And the plane landed and the arresting gear snapped and it came back across the deck, and it was taking out the crew members as it went.
Oh my gosh.
And there's a really amazing video of it that Discovery Channel caught. I mean, the end result, whenever you see all the guys start getting knocked out and hurt, it's not good. But as it started coming back, you watched one guy, he jumped the cable not once but twice with his back turned to it. Nobody knows how he did it. It was pretty amazing. But wow. As it kept going across the deck, you could see where whenever it got back towards the rest of the guys, it started just wiping them out like they were bowling pins almost.
So was your husband in that lineup?
He wasn't in the lineup.
Okay.
He was the one running security that day. They did a big article on the George Washington about him, and his commanding officer at the time, supervisor, actually said that what Justin had done, his actions were they. I think it was almost shocking because he's such a quiet, laid back guy. And it just took everybody by surprise because Justin, I mean, he really got in there. He took charge. You know, one of the ways that Justin described it, he said, I didn't care if you were the president. You weren't getting past wherever the points were. You know, he maintained the entire ship deck and the entire mass casualty. And that was the big one. Then there was.
So I'm trying to understand. So for him, it was actually seeing that traumatic event go down. Is that where the trauma happened?
Yes.
Okay.
And with him, there were 4 or 5 different events.
Okay. Okay.
With him being, he was temporarily assigned to the security department. And up until that point, and like I said, there was a switch in it. That's whenever it started happening.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that because I think that's really the way you described that was a very articulate, as literally a nuclear bomb dropped into your home.
Yes.
Tell us about that. What kind of behaviors were you seeing demonstrated as you described the emotional state of your family?
Well, one of the things that was so shocking for me was Justin and I were always very close. We didn't fight. We were very happy together. Well, whenever he came home, there were things that he would just explode into these rages over what I felt were very little things. And at one point I had said something to him about, I will give everything up, meaning the house, everything. I would live in a shack. I didn't care. I just wanted my husband back. Well, somehow in his mind at that point, in the state that he was in, he took that as I was attacking him. He started calling me a terrorist, and he held me at gunpoint. And the thing about that is, and I think why I was able to remain so calm, is one of the things, and it didn't register with me at the moment. It was thinking about it afterwards. His finger was never on the trigger. It was always on the side. And anybody that knows gun safety, which these guys are thoroughly trained with their weapons, his intent with it was not to harm me. He reverted back to his training. He was calling me a terrorist. He was controlling the situation. And at that time, to him, I was a terrorist. And the intent was never to harm. I didn't do anything. I didn't make any moves that would alarm him, that would make him feel even more threatened at the time. I didn't provoke any more action. And as soon as the whole incident was over, I called the VA immediately. And I said, look, he has got to get in. And they said, well, he wasn't injured in combat, so he is not eligible. Because at that time, it was before 2009, before President Bush had enacted the 5 years free mental health.
Right.
And so we were left on our own.
Wow.
There was nowhere. And they even told me, I hope you can find him help. And I would, oh my goodness. I told him, I said, you broke him. You need to fix him. And they were just like, sorry, there's nothing we can do.
Wow. So you were able to, when that change happened under the Bush administration, you were able to get him in for some help, it sounds like. And you even remarked in your book about, at one point, a counselor said your actions resembled someone in an emotionally abusive relationship. What does she mean by that?
Well, a lot of times with what they call secondary PTSD is the spouse and the children start taking on a lot of the behaviors and characteristics, and we start walking on eggshells out of fear of setting off the next explosion, because we never know where that's going to come from.
Right.
We start pulling away from families. We don't go out as much, and we start kind of living our life around PTSD. We, as the spouses, start looking out for triggers. We try to make sure nothing sets our husbands off. Well, if you look at abuse victims, true abuse victims, they display a lot of those same behaviors. And it's very hard for people on the outside to see a difference. The best way I know how to describe it, and it's what I told my counselor, because I had told her, no, I'm not abused. I am not abused. he didn't ever make me feel less than. I wasn't scared of my husband. I was more afraid of the damage it was doing to him. And so part of learning to manage PTSD was me learning he's not a baby. He's not my child that I have to protect. He has to learn and he has to be able to heal and learn to deal with these things. I can't protect him from everything. And breaking that cycle was one of the hardest things that I had to do, because you want your spouse to be happy. You don't want things to upset him. You don't want to set him off. And it's emotionally, I mean, it just wreaks havoc on the rest of the family, because you never know what is going to set them off, you know, what is going to launch the next attack. And whenever they attack, these guys are trained to go towards the problem. You know, a lot of us freeze. A lot of us will freeze or we will run when there's danger. Not these guys. These guys are trained to attack the problem. So when something sets them off, let it be the kids, let it be us as spouses, we're the direction of the attack. And it's so unnerving, and it's so unhealthy, the patterns that so many of us spouses get into unknowingly.
Yeah. So when you're describing this, it sounds almost somewhat of a codependent relationship where you are not wanting to trigger something. So you're in a way enabling certain things to ensure that doesn't happen in the home. And then vice versa, they're somewhat vulnerable to the triggers of action by you. Would that be a way of describing this, some of a codependent relationship? And when you say you're breaking cycle, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, yeah, codependency is a very, very good way to explain it, because that's what it resembles. And it's not that we can't live without our husband. I mean, all of us love our husbands dearly, and we would do anything for him. And if something happened to him, of course, you know, we would learn to go on. But it's not codependency as in what most people think. But I would say that's a good way to describe it, because we more become codependent on the PTSD is what happens.
Okay.
And until we learn how to make ourselves healthy, how to keep ourselves healthy, how to help them not take over. You know, I always say that there is a difference between a caregiver and a caretaker. You know, a caretaker does everything for their vet. They try to control everything. And with PTSD and these vets, obviously there's the caregiver program, which we as caregivers are paid to take care of our vet and help them. But there is a big difference between helping and doing for. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. And so one of the things, whenever I'm talking about breaking the cycle, I'm talking about, I had to really sit down and look at myself and go, is he capable of doing this? Is he learning to manage by me doing it for him? I have no problem assisting my husband with things when he needs help, but I had to stop just immediately doing it for him when something needed to be done. If something needs to be done now, I give him a chance to do it. If it's not done, like let's say he has to make an appointment, he has to make a call, make an appointment, which the phone, it's for my husband, because he was on the radio so much, and that's where he got so much bad news, you know, that accidents are happening and things like that. He had a real fear of phones. I mean, there was one point he literally came running across the house. I could hear the phone ringing. I'm in the shower, and the shower curtain flies open, and he shoves the phone in the shower with me. And I'm going, oh, this is unreal that this is happening. He could not answer the phone. So over time, I had to start going, okay, you need to call the VA and make this appointment. And after a day or two, if it's not done, I would ask him, you know, have you called? And he'd say, oh, I'll get it done. And I'll ask him, you know, do you need help? Do you need me to initiate the call? I'll dial it. I'll get him on the phone, then give it to you and talk. Give it to you so you're able to talk to him. That started working. We figured out that it wasn't so much the fear of the phone. It was that initial getting on or answering the calls or talking. So once we figured that out, then it freed me up because he's willing and he's able to do it. I just needed to help him out for a while by making the calls for him, which was fine. You've just got to find that, I guess, kind of gray area where they need help and offer to assist them. I don't just do it for him. Anytime he has to do something, I always wait for him to say, can you help me with this, before I just jump in and do it. Learning those boundaries, and that's really what it comes down to, is setting healthy boundaries for yourself and your relationship. And I talk a lot about team we. And if you're doing everything for your spouse, if you're living your life for them, then there is no team we. There's a team you, and it demoralizes these vets a lot of times. And it's funny because, they need the help, they want the help, but then they resent us spouses for that help.
Well, and I can only imagine that not only is it demoralizing on a place of feeling like you're the child-parent relationship, but I think it is also on the side. I mean, you would be best to be able to speak to this, but over time, the drain on the caretaker, the provider, is just exhausting. I mean, you can't sustain that type of constantly having to take care of everything in the relationship. So I think I love how you described the idea of boundaries that need to be there. And are we operating from a place of team us, and we have those healthy boundaries, and there's going to be things that you need to help, but I think that's really huge. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, for you, sounds like part of this journey is getting healthy and being able to establish boundaries so that you as a caregiver can have the energy and the stamina and the mental capacity to be able to provide.
Yeah. And that we see a lot of caregivers that get into this role, they are driven by fear. And I was there too. You're so afraid of the catastrophe that could happen. And finding those healthy boundaries, one of them that I speak a lot to caregivers about is the venting part of it, because everyone needs a place to bounce things off of, to maybe help figure it out. But a lot of times when we hit that point of exhaustion, which comes with the majority of caregivers until we learn to get ourselves healthy, we will start complaining about our husbands. And one of the biggest things that I help spouses understand and I teach is you've got to get your mindset right. If you're looking at your spouse as being the problem instead of having a problem, that you need to, if you're just complaining, just to complain, to get sympathy or to, and I hate to say sympathy because it sounds so demeaning, but really that's what it comes down to, is us caregivers are just looking for somebody who understands, and then we get it and it turns into a negative thing instead of a positive thing. And if your mindset isn't on finding a solution to the problem, then all you're going to do, your anger and resentment is just going to keep building and building and building until finally you just want to throw your hands up in the air and say, I quit, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And that's where, we always tell spouses, you've got to, you find a solution. I don't know any of us, once we found the solution, that goes, yeah, I found a solution, but I'm still sick of it. I'm done. It doesn't happen.
Right. It's evolving.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, how you look at situations, changing your outlook on things, the words that we use. One of the big ones that I teach is, but I hate the word but. And it's mainly whatever you say in front of the word but. I want my spouse to get help, but. Okay, whatever you just said in front of that but, you just negated it. And whatever comes after relieves you of any responsibility of changing the situation. And with all of us spouses, part of getting healthy is realizing in every situation that happens, we have three choices. We can leave the situation, we can stay in the situation without complaint, or we can change the situation. But how do you change it when someone, doesn't want to get help or doesn't want to do what you say? Well, that's the point whenever you have to learn that the only person that you have control of is yourself. And if you want them to stop treating you a certain way or reacting a certain way, you have the power to change your own reactions to things. And once you do that, I mean, it's hard. My husband said it was very hard to keep blaming me when I stopped engaging him. When I stopped engaging him and went, okay, how can we make this better? It's very hard for him to sit there and say, well, she's triggering me. You know, she won't stop fighting with me because I disengaged from the fighting. And I said, you know, I'm going to change my reaction. And I did. And that's when my husband, you know, I gave him a choice, either get help or I'm leaving. Ultimatums up until that point did not work. You know, you can threaten it and threaten it and threaten it. And we see so many spouses do it. They keep threatening they're going to leave. And basically, the more you threaten, it just starts falling on deaf ears. So I gave my husband a choice. You know, I don't care what you choose. It's either help or I'm leaving. And I will respect either decision. And he knew I was serious. I had my bags packed. I mean, I was going to follow through with whatever he chose. But I left the decision up to him. And his decision was to go get help. And so once we started on that journey where I started realizing that I had the ability to change the circumstances just because I changed myself. I changed my outlook. I changed the way I reacted to things. I set boundaries. I made myself a healthier person, which in turn helped him on his healing journey to grow and learn and start to manage his PTSD to where, I mean, it was last year we renewed our vows.
Wow. Yeah, you know, and I think that's, we all know that we can't change our spouse, and certainly when it comes to these kind of situations. But I think healthy boundaries begin that process, and it's taking ownership for what can I change. And it sounds like that's what you really advocate with when you're helping, wives or partners, spouses of those who are dealing with PTSD. What would be like 3 really actionable things that I'm just thinking of the caregiver out there that's listening to this and saying, you know what, I'm just emotionally gone right now. I'm so frustrated. There's so much bitterness. What are some ways that they personally can take ownership and create change, not trying to change their spouse, but for them personally that they could do?
3 things. Wow. I could probably give you 10. One of the things that I did that helped me so much was journaling. And I always talk about, I used 2 separate journals. I used one for my emotional venting. And then I used one for a very factual account of what happened. Because one of the ways that we shortcutted our therapy was we didn't go this back and forth, he said, she said. Mm-hmm. We would go in and I would have my notebook, and then they teased me and called me the notebook queen, which is fine. But I would take my journal in there and they'd say, okay, well, what happened? And I would give the factual account of what happened. And they would look at my husband and say, is that how you remember it? And he'd say, yeah. We cut out so much of the he said, she said that it really eliminated that locking of horns between me and him.
Right.
Well, once I heard his side of things in therapy and how his perception of the situation was, I would go back to my emotional journal and write down, I misunderstood. I assumed this. That way, it wasn't just a negative emotional dump in that personal journal. It was a full account where I could go, wow, I've got a real problem. I've got a pattern here that I'm seeing where I make assumptions. Or I always think that he is purposely doing these things to me, and he's not. He's reacting to whatever outside force or whatever I'm doing because of his view, because of his perception of things.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with me.
Right.
So that is one of the first things and quickest things that I learned to start being able to sort things out.
Yeah. I love that because, you know, in reality, what you accomplished in that was even more than just the journaling. It was actually being able to get to a place where you could have empathy, because we don't always see the other person's perspective. And then when you had a chance to sit down and, you know, not disregard your emotions, but put it in a place where you could hold that and then also understand their perspective. I think that helps us move to a place of empathy where compassion ultimately becomes the exchange rather than, the resentment, which is really, really powerful. So I want you to keep going because I think this is really, really helpful for those who are in that place of caregiving. And so the first one is journaling. What would be the next two?
The next two, I made a chart for myself. And this is how I started learning to change my thoughts, change my outlook. One of the examples I use in our Resolve of a Caregiver series that I've just recently done is I made this chart. And what I would do on the first column, I would write the event. And the example that I used is anniversary dinner. I was really looking forward to going out for our anniversary. Well, his PTSD, it didn't work out. We ended up staying home and having chicken nuggets. So I would write anniversary dinner in the first column. On the second column, I would write, how does this make me feel? And I would, I was depressed. I was crying. I felt like PTSD was taking over our lives. Then I would write in the third column, is this true? Is this the reality? No, the reality is that PTSD is not taking over our life. That I got to spend the evening with my husband. He made me chicken nuggets. It may not be a steak dinner. It may not be what I wanted, everything that I wanted, but I at least got that time with him. And so that is how I started changing my perception of things, is by on situations where I was just mad, because I wanted something. It put things back in balance. And a lot of that is a lot like the journaling. But this chart that I made was very specific to events, not events that were happening like he was angry, things like that. These were things that were important to me.
That makes
events
sense.
that were important to me. So I had this specific chart for that.
Okay.
And that's how I started changing my perception.
Wow. Okay. And give us the third one.
The third one would be learn to take care of yourself. I am big on, I'm happy with if I get a 10-minute bath, I lock the door, I turn, light some candles, maybe pour a glass of wine. 10 minutes a day can recharge your batteries so much. Go for a walk, take the dog for a walk. Just do some things for you. And it doesn't even have to be, an entire night out or a weekend or whatever. 10 minutes here and there can do so much for your mindset. Just to be able to take a break and go, hey, I'm still a person. I'm still alive. PTSD is not controlling everything in my life. I would tell my husband every so often, I tell him, hey, I need one night. I don't care when it is. I'm going to go with my girlfriends and we're going to go watch a movie. And I give him enough advance notice to where I can calm his nerves. If he's really stressing about it, I can find someone else to watch the kids. But I make plans far enough in advance so that way there's not this stress of, oh, so-and-so called, I think I want to go out tomorrow. And he's here freaking out. You've got to find that balance in between making plans for yourself and setting yourself up to fail. But once you do that, once you figure that kind of pattern out and you start taking time back for yourself just to recharge your batteries, one of the examples I use is they always tell you in an airplane, put your oxygen mask on first, then put on the kids, because you can't help anyone if you're passed out.
Right. Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. And so caregivers, you've got to put your oxygen mask on yourself. You've got to breathe. You've got to be able to focus on you for 5 or 10 minutes a day. Write in your journal. Some people like to, do stitching. Some people like to take pictures. Whatever it is that you like to do, find that passion, find it, and every day spend a little time doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think this raises a good question as it relates to the journey that you are on. And you guys are quite a ways down the road here. I mean, is the goal ultimately to have Justin return to the state before 2004? Or is it more of an acceptance of this is the new normal? And maybe just tell us a little bit about that process. Because I think obviously I kind of answered your question there, but I want you to speak to that about, because I would have to think that for some people that are listening to this, they're like, man, if we could just get back to that state before all this happened, things would be normal and these things would be right. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I have a feeling that you'd say that's not possible.
It's not possible. And that is where us as caregivers fail so bad at first, because that we keep hoping for that person to return. Mm-hmm. Not realizing that people change over time anyways, but I think it's such a drastic change that we just want we want what we think is normal back. Right. Instead of, I call it a different kind of better. No, I don't get to go out to concerts, and we don't do fairs, and we don't go to, crowded places. But what we do get to do is we go camping. We get to, spend time with the family. And that comes a lot with changing your mindset. Once you learn to look at the blessings and the good things that you have, the positives you have, it's not that it's any worse. It's just a different kind of better than anything anyone was expecting. Yeah, I've had to give up some dreams. I've had to change my life a little bit. I was working before Justin came home. I went to school. I was the manager out at Kenny Kent. It's a car dealership. I was a mechanic. I had really worked really hard to earn that, and I had to give it up. Mm-hmm. And instead of going, wow, look at everything that I've had to sacrifice for you. If everything would just go back to the way it was, our life would be fine. In the military, it's about adapting and overcoming. And we as family members and caregivers have to learn that also. It's not that person is gone forever. It's just that they've changed. There's been a trauma. And it's unfair of us to expect them and wait for that, because we're missing so many things that are happening in our lives. You've got to change that mindset and how you look at things and see the blessings that you have. And like I said, it's just, it's kind of a different kind of better, than I was ever expecting. And I'm happy because of that, not miserable because of it.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good perspective. I would love to hear your thoughts to address two things. One is, what would you say to the listener who's struggling with PTSD or who has a loved one with PTSD?
The biggest thing is get help. And help comes in many different ways. You cannot navigate PTSD life with PTSD or living with someone with PTSD without help. Both sides need to get help for themselves. Mm-hmm. Both sides need to, and when I say help for themselves, I mean clinical help. Then you need to find support. Let it be online, and that's what military PTSD is known for, is online support. You need to find local support groups. You need to get plugged into the community, to the people who have walked this line. In addition, a lot of people I see make the mistake of going, yeah, I've got this support group that I go to. And I'm like, okay, but are you in clinical help? Are you learning how to deal with your issues? Well, no, that's the biggest mistake you can make ever. And if your spouse, I always tell caregivers this, you will never force your veteran into help. And the more you try, we've seen this a gazillion times, they're going, how do I make him realize he needs help? How do I get him into help? And I'll ask the caregiver, have you talked to him about it? And they, well, yeah, we've told him, yeah. And I said, okay. And what did they say? And they said, well, my vet says that, he doesn't need help. He's fine. Nothing's wrong with him. And then I'll ask him, okay, are you in help? Are you as the caregiver in help? Are you trying to learn how to deal with this and manage this life and get yourself healthy? And they'll look at me. I mean, just fire back at me real quick. Well, no, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. I don't need help. They don't even realize that is the exact same thing that their veteran is saying.
Wow.
And so whenever you stop trying to force and change the other person, when you get yourself in help, your spouse, this goes back to whenever you learn to manage yourself and you start changing your reactions, your spouse will be more apt. I've seen some caregivers that have went to help without their spouse, without their vet. And then they'll ask them after a few sessions, I'm trying to learn how to manage this. Will you come to therapy with me so I can learn to be a better caregiver? And it's kind of, I don't want to say a deceitful way, because I don't feel that it's deceitful, because the end result is it helps and it works, and the veteran willingly goes. And it's much better than, standing there telling them, you need help, do as I say, and trying to shove it down their throat. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing something positive for you, if you're trying to become a better caregiver and learn how to manage, that team we starts being connected, and the veteran is a lot of times more apt to go. But the biggest thing is get help and get plugged into the community and find yourself, peer support.
You talk, I love how you're saying don't do this battle alone, find help for both sides. Right. And
yes,
I think sometimes the struggle, as I've had a chance to talk to folks who are dealing with this, it's kind of like, well, I get that on a national level, but locally it's been really hard for me to connect. And you kind of touched on this, but I think your mission and vision for your nonprofit Military with PTSD, it's such a huge one. I think regardless of where you're at in location, you've been able to create a grassroots effort to support people online. And I'd love to have just a little bit more information. And obviously we'll put some links below this video about what you are championing, but could you speak to that?
Sure. Military PTSD started online on Facebook. It started August 10th, 2000, 5 years ago. I can't even think right now, 2010. Mm-hmm. And at the time, whenever I started it, I was trying to learn how to work from home, because obviously I wasn't a caregiver yet. They didn't even have the caregiver program. And I was trying to find ways to work from home. Well, one of the things that I learned was through my writing and showing the things that I had done, people were really connecting to that. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take my journal and I'm going to give it to spouses. Military PTSD actually started for caregivers. The problem was within 2 weeks, I went, this isn't working, because nobody was learning anything. Without the vets there to explain their side, it was just turning into a gripe fest about the veterans. And that was I never wanted that to happen. And so we opened it up to veterans also. And our slogan, our motto is seeing it from both sides, mm-hmm. because you can't change what you don't understand. And it has grown since 2010. In 2012, we became a nonprofit. We just got our 501c3.
Congrats.
Thank you. We got that last summer. We have since then, besides the big, huge Facebook community with 120,000 people on it, veterans, spouses, active duty, parents, we've got it all there. We have launched Strength of a Warrior, which is for veterans. It's where they can learn about PTSD, and it's written from other veterans' perspectives. It's not all clinical. There are links there where you can find help, where you can find local help too, if you don't want to utilize the VA. Vet centers, we are big on vet centers. Mm-hmm. Vet centers have done probably the biggest turnaround for my husband. We've launched Resolve of a Caregiver, which is a 18 video series for caregivers. And I really focus in on Resolve on yourself. Now we're going to be launching, and I don't want to let too much out of the bag, but we are going to be launching a more advanced webinar video, online face-to-face support group for caregivers, and one for couples for marriages. And we're also getting ready to do nationwide, especially around VAs, support groups. We're going to start rolling those out one by one here in the next 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So that the
That's
military,
exciting. That's really
yes.
exciting. And I think, like I said, all of this information we're going to have right below the video so that people can get connected with what you're doing, whether it's in Facebook or online through your nonprofit. But Shawn, I just want to say thank you for your willingness to share your story, because I think in sharing the story, you're giving hope to so many families that are fighting against this invisible battle, right? And so often people outside of it can't necessarily understand it, but having someone who's been in that place and has fought that battle, this is tremendous. So thank you for the courageous stance that you've taken along with your family to really say there is hope and here's what you can do. And then the next step is really moving to a place of action. And I think that's what you're excited about, is creating a community that doesn't just sit there and say, here's all the things I wish we could change, but here's the things that we can change and how can we step into that. So again, thank you. And the book that she wrote, which is a great story, I think, of just the challenges and then how to overcome those challenges, is The War at Home.
Now I do want to say on our book,
Yeah.
It's got a uniqueness that not many other books have. And I don't know that a lot of people know this about the book that have not read it yet. The book is written by me, but we use the notes, and my husband sat right next to me. We go back and forth between my perspective and his perspective. So the entire book is literally seeing it from both sides.
Yeah. Which is powerful. It really is. Well, again, the book, if you want to get your hands on that, we have that down below the video. But Shawn, thank you. Thank you for being on this show, and we wish you the best.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And you guys have been wonderful. I appreciate it so much.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.